can to the wheel. The center of your body is over the center of the clay. Has to be wet, so do your hands. And the first thing you do is look, and make sure your splash pads are on properly so they don't make that awful noise. And the first thing you do is called centering, where you're really trying to get that clay up. The point is, you see it now? It's wobbling, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't possibly make a symmetric, beautiful form with that. So before you can create something, you need to center the clay. And it's basically, when I used to teach kids, I told them it's like hugging the clay with your hands. You know, you're using some pressure evenly. You're not fighting with it, but you're trying to just make your two hands work like a tool. If you see, my hands are kind of locked together. This
Keep it
one's
steady.
here.
Is it to help you keep it steady? Keep your
Well,
arms steady?
what happened? Yeah,
Because you're very steady.
I'm very steady. My arms are locked onto my thighs.
Because I think it would be very tricky to keep those hands steady for
Wh-
me. Like, you know,
Oh.
because it takes time
What
to learn that.
happens is if you don't keep your arms on your legs, for example, if you did this,
Yeah.
the clay would move you
Of course.
around. But this is really just a process of, you bring it up, and then when you bring it back down, the reason my left hand is there is if all I did was press on the top, I'd wind up with a mushroom, you see? The clay, so this way the clay has nowhere to go if I'm holding the side and the top. The most basic form, I mean, there are really basic three forms for everything you do. There are cylinders, and that's generally the first thing people learn. Bowls and plates. And plates are really just very, very shallow bowls, I think. Okay, so now that's pretty centered. You can see it's not wobbling around. Just making sure it's all the way up. That it's happy so I don't embarrass myself and throw something off center in front of everybody.
I'm waiting for Patrick Swayze to come.
I was thinking the same thing.
Little Demi Moore.
Excuse me? Keep waiting. Closest I get is a guy that looks like Einstein. Watching MSNBC in the other room.
He doesn't sit behind you and do that.
All right. The truth is that when we were first married, when I first went back, when I first was doing clay in the city, okay, the next thing I do, I'll tell you the story in a second, is I open up a hole. I use basically my middle finger with the two other fingers braced next to it. Some people use their thumbs, but I don't feel like you can feel it well enough with that. And you're dropping a hole. You can come closer if you want to see. You're creating the inside so that there will be walls, right? And I'm spreading it a little bit while I'm doing that. You don't want to go too far because then your pot won't have a bottom. And you want to go far enough so your pot doesn't weigh, 40 pounds. Also, sometimes if the bottom's too thick, it can crack when you fire it.
Now,
Oh, wow.
when you start out, do you have an idea of what you're going to
Usually, you
create?
throw better when you do.
Yeah.
You do throw better, but since I'm demoing, so I just check the bottom, and that's pretty much a good size bottom, okay? And now, while I'm doing this, you want to leave enough clay so that you can trim a foot. If you look at the bottom of pieces, you'll notice that you can grab something behind you.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Turn it upside down, and that's the foot.
Oh, okay.
So you have to leave enough clay to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes, especially when you're first learning, that process of opening it up can throw it off center. But again, you just, if you hold it between your hands
Beautiful, look
evenly,
at,
you put it back on.
outside.
Okay. Next thing I'm going to do, we're going to be bringing up the wall to make it an actual cylinder next, but there's a lot of clay there. I'm just squeezing it between these two fingers to bring up some of it.
It's so easy.
How do you manage to do it without breaking it as it goes around?
Takes
Years of
Practice.
experience. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is an actual pull. And I'm going to find the bottom of this pot where the floor is. I'm going to go at about 4 o'clock. If you look at this, and my left hand is inside the clay, the pot, my right hand is on the outside. I have an extra little bit, but that's all right. I'm not worried about it. I'm just pulling it up between my fingers. Just want to bring this in a little bit. The clay is natural because of the I guess it's centripetal force. The clay's natural tendency is to go like that, right? So if you let it get wider, then the whole thing gets very wide and you lose control of it. The other thing I want to do is that bottom's a little too narrow. What you start with is what you're going to live with in terms of that diameter. So, okay, you can see, people on this side can probably see it better, that clay is moving up between my fingers. You see that bulge?
Yeah.
I got one finger under it and one finger over it. I'm going to bring that in again, a little too. But this is the same basic form. If I were making a pitcher, or a teapot, or a mug, or a cookie jar, or even a planter, they're all just cylinders. And some of them require a lot more shape. This needs more water. As you work, you add water. Your hands will drag on it if it's too dry. Okay. I'm pulling that a little fast, which is why I'm getting that twist, but I'll fix it. I shouldn't be getting a twist, but I did it a little bit faster than the clay really wanted me to, and it's, but we're not worried. I'll go back in and even that all out. So I will mention that I talked to Jessica Dubin, who is the director at the Peekskill Clay Studio where I'm a member, and said, I think you should do triad classes. I think a lot of people would be interested.
Yeah.
And she said, you know, we did that at one time, but then we didn't get enough people interested. If you got enough people interested, you could do it. So, if you're interested, let me know. You know, she said people couldn't save anything. It would be a 2-hour thing. I think she charged $25. But it's kind of a fun thing to do.
Absolutely.
Could even, you know, do like wine and cheese or something after, you know, do something afterwards.
Now you're talking.
Forget that tea.
Okay,
You
so
make
now,
wine glasses?
actually I have some goblets that are waiting to be glazed at the studio. So now I've got a cylinder, and I'm just going to take one of my favorite tools, which is called a rib, and do what's called compressing the surface. I'm getting rid of the extra water and those throwing lines.
Smooth it out.
Yeah.
How sweet is that?
Okay, what shape would you like out of this? Anybody?
No pressure.
Okay.
How about one of your figure like vessels?
Oh, you mean like what I just made, like what's over there?
Like these?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
unusual.
Those undulating.
Not
lines.
one of
Those are my
those.
gestural bottles.
Is that what they're
Okay.
called? Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to see you make a gestural bottle.
Well, it's not thrown like that, it's thrown as a bottle. So, let's give this some shape.
Yep, thanks.
Let's give this a little bit more shapes before we try to do that. So you see I'm narrowing that because that's gonna eventually be the neck.
That's beautiful.
But we want a little bit of a curve if it's gonna be a bottle.